Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm welcome to our keynote speaker, Mr. Tony Seba.
Thank you kindly for that introduction, and thank you so much for making the time to be here tonight. I'm going to take you into the future. But the future is not 50 years from now. The future is 5, 10, 15 years from now. But before I do that, I'm going to take you into the past. Has anyone been to New York lately? New York City? Yeah, you can admit it. Okay. This is New York City, 1900. Can anyone see the one car in this picture? It's a sea of horses. Can anyone see the car? There. There is one car in New York City, 1900. This is 1913, same place, Fifth Avenue, New York. Can anyone see the one horse in that picture? This, ladies and gentlemen, is a disruption. Disruptions are not new. Disruptions have been happening for hundreds of years. And the last major disruption of transportation happened very, very quickly. New York City basically went from all horse to all cars in 13 years. So let me define what a technology disruption is. This is not just about energy. This is about technology disruption. So we know them very well. Anyone who's using a tablet, anyone who's using a digital camera knows what a disruption is. It's essentially when technologies, new technologies, make it possible for the creation of products and services that do two things. One is they create new markets, and also at the same time, or eventually, they either destroy radically, totally existing markets or transform them. So going from digital cameras, from film camera to digital, basically digital camera destroyed film. There's no film anymore. But what Uber is doing, for instance, in transportation, they're not killing taxis. They're radically transforming that industry. So either one is a technology disruption. Now, let me take you from 1900 to 1985. Because what happens is that the smartest people in the room are not necessarily the ones who get disruptions. And so in 1985, the then largest telecommunication company in the world, AT&T, hired McKinsey, the management consulting firm, and they asked them one question. The question was, in 15 years, so in the year 2000, what's going to be the market for this new thing called the cell phone? So McKinsey went off and they did whatever it is that they do, and they came back with the number, 900,000. They thought that the American market for cell phones was going to be 900,000. The actual number ended up being 109 million. This is not a small mistake. This is a factor of 120, right? You know, my little dog could do better than that. 120. So, you know, it's not by being disrupted, the landline telephony business, you know, the difference was 120. AT&T's landline telephony essentially went away. But that's not the worst thing. The worst thing is that if you look at the market valuation of the top 15 internet companies, which now is mobile internet companies, in 2015, basically that's a $2.4 trillion market valuation. And that is what AT&T missed out on. Not that they would have taken the whole $2 trillion, but these are the opportunities that when you don't anticipate disruptions well, you both lose out your existing business, and you miss out on trillions of potential opportunities. And like I said, it's not the smartest people in the room. Usually, the experts and the insiders are the ones who will dismiss disruptive opportunities. So if you look at the quotes from Bill Gates and from Ken Olson, I mean, these folks were CEOs of disruptive companies themselves. But they did not see the next disruption coming. And they were the ones who dismissed disruption opportunities. So a lot of what I do, a lot of my work, is to answer this question. Why do smart people in smart organizations consistently fail to anticipate, let alone lead market disruptions? And I came up with a new framework for disruption that takes into account every potential way of disrupting the existing markets. And I'll just go quickly through what I work is on technologies, and more than anything on what's called exponential technologies, which is technologies that improve at double-digit rates on a per dollar basis every year. Now, our brains are linear. Our brains are not built to think exponentially, so this is an acquired skill. And Moore's law is one of the basically exponential technologies that we all know well. So Moore's law essentially says that computing doubles in power every 2 years for the same dollar. So that's a compound annual growth improvement rate of 41%. When you improve at a 41% per year, essentially you double every 2 years. Over 10 years, that's a 1,000 time improvement. Over 20 years, it's a 1 million time improvement, not 2,000. See, our brain don't necessarily work exponentially. Over 30 years, it's 1 billion times. And that's why computing has disrupted or enabled the disruptions of so many industries. I mean, the smartphone that you have in your hands is 1 billion times more powerful than basically 30 years ago. It would have cost $600 billion for that same computing power, right? And now you hold it in your hands. But it's not just about computing power. Many other technologies. I was an early employee at a then little company called Cisco Systems in 1993 when I was doing my MBA at Stanford. And we were looking at several technologies that were improving on an exponential basis. Digital imaging and storage and so on and so forth, because we knew that all of these were going to affect data, right? And essentially our business, and we had to go at least at that rate to even survive. And it's usually a convergence of technologies that make it possible. It's not just one technology, it's a convergence that make it possible to build disruptive products and services. And when you look at the iPhone and the Android, for instance, they only came out 2007. Now, if in 2007 anyone had said that these would sell 3 billion units a year, you know, within 10 years, they would have thought, you're crazy, right? And yet, the smartphone did not even exist 10 years ago. And also, it's not coincidental that both the Android and the iPhone came out the exact same year, which is 2007. And the reason was that the convergence of technologies that made it possible basically happened around 2007. So that was the past, that was the last few decades. What am I looking at in terms of technologies that are going to change everything over the next 5, 10 to 20 years? And these are not everything. This is what I'm looking at. Robotics, artificial intelligence, solar energy, 3D printing, and so on and so forth. So I follow about a dozen key technologies that in different combination will be disruptive in many industries. So in a combination, it can disrupt construction, for instance. In another combination, it can disrupt manufacturing, for instance. And I have focused on energy and transportation. So this is the framework that I used, and I applied it to energy and transportation. And the end result was the book called Clean Disruption. And what it essentially says is that there are four key technology products: energy storage, electric vehicles, self-driving, and solar, that each one of them is disruptive individually, but when they converge and when they enable one another, they're going to disrupt everything in energy and transportation. And as you'll see over the next few minutes, it's going to happen very quickly because it's a technology disruption. So let me start with energy storage. And I'll talk specifically about lithium-ion batteries. Lithium-ion batteries essentially is what we've been using in laptop computers and in cell phones and so on for about 20 years. And from 1995 to about 2010, lithium-ion on a per dollar basis improved at 14% per year. So 14% exponential improvement. Around 2009, two new industries came into lithium-ion, meaning more investments and bigger market and more R&D and so on, automotive and energy. And since then, the technology cost curve has actually been accelerating. So from 2010 to 2014, it improved at about 16% per year. And over the last year and a half, the data suggests that it's been accelerating. It's been improving at even more than 16%. But even if we only take 16%, essentially, and assuming that it's going to keep improving at that rate, we can look at the next 5, 10, 15 years at the cost of batteries. Now, I'm not saying that in 10 years, lithium-ion is going to be the only game in town, but any other technology is going to have to beat this curve. So let's use lithium-ion as an example. And so, question, is it really going to continue to improve by about 16, maybe more percent per year? I'll give you one example. This is an 18650 battery. This is a little bigger than a AA battery. This is what Tesla uses to power the Tesla Model S. 7,000 of these. So how are these made? You mine the lithium in Argentina or Chile or Australia. You ship it to China, where it's purified. They ship it to Korea or Japan, where it's put in this form, in the form of a battery. And then they ship it to California, where Tesla puts it, 7,000 of these, into a pack, and out the other way comes a Tesla Model S. Now, what you notice from what I said was there's a lot of waste in that supply chain. Chile to China to Japan to California to build this. So by putting most of that supply chain in one place, essentially you can cut anywhere from 30 to 50% of the cost of lithium-ion batteries over the next few years. And that doesn't even include technology improvements. So if we improve the technology, silicon anodes and so on, basically a Tesla is saying that technology alone is going to increase the energy density by about 5% per year. So that's how we think that the cost is going to go down in the foreseeable future. And if you look at last year's, almost a year ago, Tesla announced their grid storage technology, the Powerwall. These costs are way ahead of my curve. They're actually 2-3 years ahead of the curve that I showed you. And just to show you the latent market for grid storage at these costs, essentially Tesla sold about $1 billion in grid storage the first week after the announcement. Boom. Just by announcing, they got about $1 billion in order, right? But Tesla's not the only one. I mean, I'm using them as an example, but a number of companies are getting into the battery game. They have seen that this is a big market opportunity. So anywhere from BYD and Foxconn and LG and Samsung SDI, Nissan. Yesterday, a couple of days ago, Total announced that they were acquiring a battery company, Saft. So dozens of companies are getting into the lithium-ion battery game, basically investing billions of dollars. And what is happening is that 16% cost curve will accelerate, which is not unusual. Another thing that I look at when I look at disruptions is business model innovation. So technology innovation is very important, but business model innovation is every bit as disruptive as technology innovation. So if you think about Uber or Airbnb, they are business model innovations. So an Uber took advantage of two infrastructures, the cloud and the mobile phone infrastructure, and basically put together a new business model that took advantage of the inefficiencies in two markets, and boom, they created a big company, and I'm going to come back to that. So how does that apply to energy storage? There is a number of companies in Silicon Valley that are doing essentially what's called zero money down storage, or storage as a service. So basically, they go into a store, a 7-Eleven or a hotel, and what happens, at least in some markets, is you go into a 7-Eleven, you open the door, the fridge, there's a spike at that moment in energy demand, and for that one spike, that 7-Eleven will have to pay a higher energy price for the rest of that month. So if all you do is you take a battery behind the meter, and essentially you filter those spikes, that 7-Eleven will pay a lower energy cost for that whole month. And these companies are offering essentially to put it there and participate in the energy savings. So this is just, at today's cost, a business model innovation. And these companies are growing super exponentially. And if you take that model to its logical conclusion, essentially, in the US, which is probably the US household, consumes 30 kilowatt hours per day, one of the highest in the world, to store a full day of electricity in the year 2020 will cost $1.20 per day. $1.20 per day. Now, I'm not saying that people will get off the grid, but if they wanted to, it would cost them $1.20 a day. But you don't need 24 hours of storage to be disruptive. If you think about the way that some utilities price the electricity, an example is Arizona Public Service, which during the summer peak charges 49 cents per kilowatt hour. That's between 3 and 7 or so when people come back home and they switch on the air conditioner. But at midnight, the electricity is 5 cents. So there's a 10x difference between 4 p.m. and midnight. So if all you do is have 4 hours of electricity storage at home, you disrupt the pricing power of that utility. Essentially, you charge at midnight to 4 a.m. when it's 5 cents, and you use it between 3 and 7. So the biggest margin product of that utility goes away. So not only do revenues go down, profits go down super exponentially. The other part of the grid, the existing grid, that storage is going to disrupt is, well, large-scale grid storage. And how does that work? Our grid is essentially a just-in-time supply chain. there's very little storage, if any, in most electricity systems. So the more we consume, the more, of course, they switch on peakers. We consume more peakers go on. So this is an example of the New York utility, Con Ed, which 32% of their assets is essentially peakers. But they're only used less than 6% of the time. And in some cases, less than a couple of hundred hours a year. So 32% of the generating assets of this utility, which is not uncommon, are peakers. And how do you disrupt peakers? With storage. So there's a large energy company in Texas called Encore that has proposed a $5 billion storage project. And what are they going to do? Well, they're going to buy the good old business model. They're going to buy when electricity is low at midnight or 4 a.m., and they're going to sell during the peak. And by doing that, they essentially disrupt peakers, which is about a third of generating assets. And even conventional energy CEOs are saying that there may never be another peaker after 2020. And what they're not saying is that the existing peakers may well be stranded way before that. Now, that is how storage can be disruptive, especially to the electricity system. The other way, a big disruption is the electric vehicle disruption. And I'm going to use Tesla as an example. The Tesla Model S has been called the best car ever made by Motor Trends, by Consumer Reports. In fact, Consumer Reports gave it a ratings of 103 out of 100. Out of 100. I mean, basically it's such a good car that it broke even the dial of Consumer Reports. Now, this is the best car ever made, not the best EV ever made, right? And in many markets, the Tesla is already the best-selling large luxury vehicle. Austria, the US, and so on, it's the best-selling car in its category, right? The issue is who can afford an electric vehicle? Who can afford it? Now, that's not my car. It's a good photo op, but it's not my car. I actually don't own a car. I'll come back to that later. But let me ask the question first. Is the electric vehicle disruptive? Remember the definition? Basically, disruptive is a product that destroys existing markets or radically transform them. So let me walk you through a few of the reasons. The first one is that the internal combustion engine automobile is only about 17 to 21% efficient in converting the energy in the gasoline in the tank into actual usable power. So 80% of the energy literally goes up in smoke. The electric drivetrain is 90 to 95% efficient. So it's 5 times more efficient, just about, than the ICE car. Now, that in and of itself is not what's disruptive, but when you combine that with the fact that transporting electrons, meaning electricity, is much cheaper than transporting atoms, meaning gasoline or diesel, you get that on a per kilometer basis, depending on the local market prices, it's about 10 times cheaper per kilometer to charge an electric vehicle as it is to fuel an ICE car. 10 times. And every time we have a 10x in an important dimension, we have a potential disruption. 10 times. Now, this is your car, assuming you have an ICE car. Your car has 2,000 plus moving parts, not parts, moving parts. That's why the aftermarket is such a good business, right? The Tesla Model S has 18. Let me repeat that. 18 moving parts. That's 1% of the moving parts of the internal combustion engine automobile, which means that maintenance is 1%, a few percent, 10x to 100x cheaper than for an EV as it is for an ICE car. So it's 1% of the parts, which is why a Tesla is offering infinite mile warranty. Infinite. You can drive your car to the moon and back, and they will still warranty it. I mean, these things don't break, because they only have 820 moving parts. Because of the torque, the EV is far more powerful than the ICE car. And the Tesla Model S, which is $100,000, is being compared to the $1 million supercars, to the Lamborghinis and so on and so forth. Again, at 10x. It's 10x. It's being compared to cars that are 10 times the cost. So here's the disruption. And for the MBAs in the crowd, we need a 2x2. So here's the 2x2. For 100 years, the auto industry has said, do you want high performance? Then you pay high prices. Do you want medium performance? Then you pay medium prices. And do you want low performance? Then you pay low prices. What EVs are going to do is essentially shift that curve to the point where we'll soon be able to buy high performance for medium prices, meaning we're going to have Porsche performance for Buick prices. And at that point, neither Porsche nor Buick are able to compete with the electric vehicle. So the only question at this point, assuming that it's, we believe that it is disruptive, is how long will this transition take? So if we take the fact that batteries are the biggest cost component of the car, they're about a third of the cost of an electric vehicle, and we start at 2014's when the Tesla Model S cost $75,000. We take that 16% cost curve, and here's what we get. By about 2017 to 2018, the curve is saying that the industry, not just Tesla, the industry should be able to produce and sell. Now, let me interrupt. 200 miles, meaning 320 kilometers, in my estimation, is the minimum that the industry will need to go mainstream, right? So 320 kilometer. By 2017, 2018, the 320 kilometer car, electric vehicle, will cost $35,000 to $40,000. This is unsubsidized. By about 2020, the industry will come up with electric vehicles with 320 kilometers that cost less than $30,000. Now, this is important because in America, the median new car costs $33,000. So what this curve says is that by 2020, an electric vehicle will be cheaper than the quote-unquote equivalent ICE car, and also it will be 10x cheaper to fuel or charge and 10 to 100x cheaper to maintain. So at that point, essentially the decision is the same decision that we all made when digital cameras achieved the same price performance as film cameras, but digital is a zero marginal cost product. And that's when Kodak basically went away. There was nothing that the film industry could do, that Kodak could do to compete against zero marginal cost. So essentially in 2020 or so, if this cost curve is correct, that's where half the market goes away for new cars. And of course, the cost curve will continue. And by 2022 or so, the industry will disrupt even the low end. The low end in America, which is about $20,000. So there will be $20,000 EVs with 320 kilometer range. And that cost curve will continue. I mean, by 2030 or so, the industry will produce $5,000 electric vehicles for essentially with 320 kilometer range. Gone. Internal combustion engine automobile, gone, right? In the West, by about 2025, no more basically every new vehicle after that will be electric, 2025. And even if I'm wrong by a few years, by 2030, it's pretty much all over. And what's the industry saying about this curve? Well, GM just announced a Bolt, which is a 200-mile range electric vehicle for $37,500 unsubsidized. And they're basically going to start producing it at the end of this year and in mass next year, 2017. So they're right on that curve, maybe even faster. Tesla, a few weeks ago, announced the Tesla Model 3, 200 miles again for $35,000 unsubsidized, 215-mile range. And they had 180,000 cars sold the first 24 hours. That was the biggest sales event of any product in any industry ever. Right? 180,000 people gave Tesla $1,000 to reserve a car. So they sold $6.3 billion. And within the week, they had essentially pre-sold 400,000 cars. And they're still selling them. Now, the craziest thing about that is that Tesla raised $400 million from potential customers in a week. It was a crowdfunding event. This was the biggest crowdfunding event in history. They did not need a bank to raise $400 million. But again, Tesla, the Model 3, which is coming probably in a year and a half, $35,000. So it's on the low end of my cost curve. And by now, most companies have basically looked at that and said, look, EVs are coming. We need to fully electrify. Ford, GM, Foxconn. Wait, Foxconn. Did I say Foxconn? Foxconn is the company that makes the iPad, right? That makes the iPhone. What are they doing in electric vehicles? They said they're getting into that market, right? There's a whole number of technology companies, of computer companies, getting into the electric vehicle market. Why? Because if you have one big battery and 18 moving parts, essentially EVs are big computer tablets on wheels. And that's why Uber is getting into the business, Foxconn, Baidu, Google, Apple. Every week you hear of a new technology company getting into the EV business. So it's not just the conventional car companies. And business model innovation can be disruptive again and can accelerate that disruption. So I'll point you to two things. One is free charging. There are companies that in exchange for advertising rights at malls and at supermarkets and so on, essentially they're giving away charging. So a Walmart, for instance, would say, if you come and shop at Walmart, while you shop, we can offer free EV charging. And of course, what does that mean? Zero marginal cost. Gasoline cannot compete with zero marginal cost, period, right? The other thing about electric vehicles that's totally disruptive is that you can power your house, your building, with an EV. And you can power the EV with the house, right? So if you have solar or even with the existing infrastructure, essentially the EV is one big battery. So you can, I did the numbers for Thailand, for instance. And in Thailand, if the 11.7 million cars are go electric with 320-kilometer range, essentially the cars on the road without grid storage, EVs, 11.7 million EVs, would have the storage for 130% of the daily electricity demand in Thailand. Just electric vehicles. Try that with your VW diesel, right? You just can't, right? And this is another reason why EVs are disruptive. So, as big as the EV disruption is, there's an even bigger disruption, which is the self-driving automobile or the self-driving vehicle. And let me show you, you've probably seen self-driving videos, but let me show you one. Audio?
With an AV license plate. The first autonomous truck on public roads ever, anywhere in the world.
Germany's Daimler rolled out the Inspiration Tuesday night. It has been granted a license for road use in the state of Nevada. The license allows the Inspiration to be tested on Nevada's freeways and highways. Nevada is one of 4 states and the District of Columbia that allow autonomous vehicle testing on public roads. A Daimler spokesperson said they opted for Nevada because they had strong and clear regulations for acquiring the road license. The Inspiration has technology that is similar to the self-driving Mercedes-Benz future truck.
So that's Daimler. Volvo is doing 100, basically a pilot with 100 cars. Google, as you know, has a couple of 100 cars on the road, and they've gone like about 2 million miles with just one single accident. They've been hit about 19 times, but they've caused one single accident. Tesla says that every new car coming out of California is 90% self-driving already. This is not new technology. In fact, many of you are probably using many of autonomous vehicle technologies. The key to self-driving is when we get to level 4. Level 4, fully autonomous, means no human needed. We can basically sleep in the car or do whatever we want. Not pedals, not even steering wheels. And Tesla says that within 2 years, we're going to be there. Nissan says that within a couple years, maybe 2020 at the most, they'll launch fully level 4 self-driving cars. And what about the cost? So a lot of the media would say that autonomous vehicles, when I say vehicles, I also mean trucks and buses and tractors and everything, right? Not just cars. So let me give you 2 examples of technologies and how they're improving on an exponential basis. So this is what a self-driving car sees when they use a sensor called LiDAR. So essentially, LiDAR stands for laser and radar. So it emits about 1 million laser pulses per second, 100 meters, 360 degrees, which when they bounce back like a radar, and you have a supercomputer in the trunk, they create a view, a 360-degree view of the world, right? And so that's what it looks like. It says, oh yeah, this is a tree, this is a little cat crossing the road, or this is a car coming at me at 100 kilometers per hour. So LiDAR, in 2012, when Google announced the cost of its self-driving car, was $70,000, just the LiDAR, right? And of course, at the time, what did the experts say? Not going to happen. Not going to happen anytime soon. What did happen was that by the end of the following year, the next generation LiDAR was $10,000. So went down by about 7x in just 1 year. And in another year, a Silicon Valley company announced LiDAR for $1,000. So the CEO spoke in my class, and he said, yep, we're making them, right? $1,000. So LiDAR went from 70K to 1K, but wait, there's more. That same company in January announced the $250 LiDAR. $250. So something that was $70,000 just 5 years ago, boom, now it's $250. And they also announced the $90 LiDAR, the size of a postage stamp. But that's for drones and for robots. That's another conversation altogether. So what about computing power? I said that you needed supercomputing power to process all this sensor information. So let's talk about that. This was the world's first 1 teraflops computer. That was in the year 2000, Y2K. 1 teraflops, 1 trillion floating point operations per second. It was $50 million or so, and essentially it was used for nuclear simulation. Last year, the CEO of NVIDIA announced the 2 teraflops GPU for $59. Should I say that again? From 1 teraflops and 50 million to 2 teraflops and $59. Okay? So essentially supercomputing power is not expensive anymore. That's because of the exponential improvement in computing, and GPUs especially. And NVIDIA's GPU, by the way, he also announced this year the new version, which is the size of a lunchbox, with 8 teraflops. 8 teraflops, and that's going to be all you're going to need for self-driving. And it also includes the self-driving technology. So it's not going to be expensive. It's going to be an incremental, maybe $1,000 or $2,000. The other question is the market ready for self-driving? Well, many markets are. Cisco Systems did a study around the world, and this is what they came up with. In places like China, in Brazil, and India, about half the world's population, consumers are saying, yeah, bring it on right now, sight unseen. Why? I'm guessing that this is why. And having driven in Bangkok, I would think that this market is ready also for self-driving. So self-driving is cool, so what? I mean, we'll be able to Facebook and Twitter and trade stock and text and all that good stuff. That's cool. So what? Is it disruptive? And if so, how? The disruption happens because of a combination of the technology and a business model innovation. In the business model innovation, and I said, I don't own a car. This is my car, right? This is my car. Essentially, for about 8 years, I've been using this for research as a main mode of transportation. So I use Lyft, I use Uber, on-demand transportation. So let me walk you through 3 things. 1, car sharing. Companies that allow you to share basically cars. You can rent it by the hour or by the day. An example is Zipcar. And the interesting thing about Zipcar is that they say that there are 15 members per car. So essentially, extrapolating from that, basically if everyone here were to do Zipcar, essentially there would be 15 times fewer cars on the market. BMW also has its own car sharing company, and look at the way that it's growing exponentially. So this is a new way of doing things. Ride sharing, I'm not going to say much. Uber booked about $10 billion, a company that did not exist in 2008. Booked about $10 billion in revenues in bookings last year. But more interestingly than that, they're valued higher than BMW. Uber, which does not own or make anything, a single car, it's a software company, it's valued at more than BMW or Nissan or many other automotive companies. And here's another interesting thing. Carpooling is half of Uber rides in San Francisco. Carpooling means if I'm going from A to B and we pick up somebody on the way, I pay about half. So half of Uber rides are carpools. What does that mean? It means that for the right price signal, people are willing to change behavior. The last number that I want to give you is this. We spend a lot of money buying cars, and yet we only use them 4% of the time. I mean, where's your car now? Parked, right? We only use our cars 4% of the time. Show me a 4% asset utilization industry, and I'll show you a disruption waiting to happen. So let's combine that business model, car sharing, with self-driving, and here's what we come up with. Uber announced that it's building its own self-driving car. So that 80% that they're paying the drivers, they don't want to pay that. So the way they see the world is cars and vans and buses and so on, SUVs, going around all the time, self-driving, picking you up at home, taking you to work, then taking you everywhere. So essentially, car ownership goes away because, well, let me give you the numbers. And it's not just Uber. It's GM, which invested $500 million into Lyft, which is Uber's competitor. They also invested $1 billion in buying a self-driving car company from Silicon Valley. And they say that asset utilization will go from 4%, which it is now, to 60 to 70%. Right? I think it's more like 80, but it doesn't matter whether it's 60 or 80. That's a 15-time improvement in asset utilization, which means what? The cost per kilometer, when we combine this car sharing model with self-driving, goes down by 10 times. So we pay about $1 a mile. Essentially, we're going to pay 10 cents a mile for the same level of service for not owning a car. Basically, boom, we don't need to own a car. We always have cars available to pick us up from anywhere, take us anywhere, at 10 times cheaper than what we pay today for cars. I have never seen a market that for the same level of service goes down by 10x and the market doesn't go there, right? So what happens when you combine self-driving and car sharing is that we're going to need 80% fewer cars on the road. And that even assumes that the number of miles traveled is going to double, right? So we need 80% fewer cars, which means we don't need 80% of parking spaces. Especially, I mean, imagine real estate, especially in the downtown areas where it's so expensive, boom, 80% of parking spaces are not needed anymore. That's the disruption. So the disruption of transportation says this. It's an efficiency disruption on 3 fronts, from human-driven to computer-driven, from ICE car to EV, and from basically ownership to car sharing. And every market is going to go along these 3 dimensions at different rates. But essentially, by 2030, every car is going to be electric, self-driving, and car shared. And it's going to cost 10 times at least less on a per kilometer basis. Okay, shock, right? Now, how are we going to power all those cars? Disruption number 4, the solar disruption. Solar is a technology. Everything I'm talking about is a technology, right? And solar has come down in cost from $100 a watt in 1970 to 45 cents a watt. That's an improvement of 222 times, right? It keeps improving at a 10 to 11% rate every year. And at the same time, since about 1990, the installed base for solar has been doubling every 2 years. Now, remember how I started the conversation? What happens if you double every 2 years? Over 10 years, that's 1,000x, and so on and so forth, right? So if it keeps doubling every 2 years, what's going to happen? That essentially by 2030, everything will be solar. Okay, so we can do anything on a spreadsheet. Let's do the numbers and see if this is even possible. Can it continue at this rate? So let's look at traditional, conventional energy sources. Nukes, natural gas, oil, coal. From 1970 to basically now, they've all gone up from 6 to 16 times. I mean, even at today's low cost, all of these sources are 6 to 16 times more expensive than they were in 1970. So when you put it together with the fact that solar has come down by about 200 times, what you get is this. what you get is that solar has improved by anywhere from 1,300 to 3,000 times on a unit cost basis relative to all sources of conventional energy. Now, if you're in the energy industry, at which point do you start losing sleep? At 2,000, at 3,000, at 4,000? Because solar is going to continue to go down in cost. I mean, we expect another 50% drop by 2020. So essentially, this cost curve is going to continue. Plus business model innovation. What actually enabled the residential and commercial market, the distributed solar generation market in the US, was basically a model called zero money down solar, basically third-party finance. And if you look at how steeply that curve went, now just about 80% of all new solar installations, essentially you have companies that finance, install, and maintain the solar on the rooftop of the residential or commercial customer. So the customer doesn't take any risk, not financial, not technology risk at all, because somebody else will do it for them. And there's a whole number of business model innovation that have enabled or can enable different, solar or wind, right? And I'm not going to go through everything. But this is important. For decades, the mantra for solar has been what's called grid parity, which means the point at which unsubsidized rooftop solar becomes as cheap or cheaper than what we can buy from the grid. And I think it's very, very important. And in fact, it's already, solar is already cheaper than grid parity in hundreds of markets. But the point that's going to be the point of no return is going to be what I call God parity. And I'll get to that in a second. So again, Deutsche Bank says that by the end of next year, solar will be at or below grid parity in 80% of global markets. 80%. That's not bad. Which means, solar is going to continue growing, maybe even at higher exponential rates. In fact, this year in the US, the solar market is expected to double in 1 year, double, instead of every 2 years. And it's going to continue to go down in cost, right, because of that. Now, technologies don't grow linearly. The markets don't adopt technologies in a linear fashion. When you look at reports from the IEA, from OPEC, from many analysts, they will have you believe that solar, which is about 1.5% of the market now, is going to be 2% in a couple of years, and then maybe 3%, and then maybe 4%, and so on. Technologies don't go like that. And they don't get the fact that solar is a technology. It's not an energy source. The energy source is the sunshine. So every technology goes through an S-curve adoption. When they hit that tipping point, essentially, they accelerate adoption. They gain about 80% of the market within months or years or weeks, even in the case of apps. And then they slow down a little bit. So in terms of making decisions about when solar is going to disrupt a specific market, because there are many electricity markets, then we need to figure out what that tipping point is. And that tipping point is what I call God parity. Okay? Now, it's not a religious thing. I'll explain what that is. God parity means when unsubsidized rooftop solar, basically on the roof of your house or Walmart or the supermarket or this shopping mall, falls below the cost of transmission. Not electricity rates, but transmission. So at that point, even if you generate at zero, right, in natural gas plants or coal plants or whatever, even if you bring the God particle from CERN and you generate at zero, when you add the cost of transmission, you still cannot compete with rooftop solar. And solar, as I said, is going to keep going down. So that is the point at which solar becomes a consumer item. And also, more importantly, that's the point at which it's going to be in everybody's selfish, best economic interest to put up solar on any available rooftop, whether it's theirs or somebody else's, whether you own a parking lot or a mall. For those 1,800 hours of sunshine in Thailand, the central generation utility will never be able to compete with solar. So it becomes in the consumer's best selfish interest. It's not going to be about being green. It's going to be about the dollar green, right? Boom. That is the tipping point. And that's when everybody is going to go out and buy solar the way they buy essentially smartphones. When is that going to happen? And at that point, of course, when God parity hits, all kinds of central generation are going to be obsolete. It doesn't matter. Nothing can produce at zero, right? So even solar plus storage are going to be below transmission by 2020 to 2022. In fact, solar is already below the cost of transmission in many places like Australia. Already, solar is cheaper than transmission. So, but here's a question. Can you generate all the electricity that you need from distributed generation? And the answer is in most places, probably not. So everybody will put up solar panels everywhere that they can. But, you know, we still have aluminum smelters and we have data centers and so on. So we're still going to need utility scale generation. So what's going to happen there? Well, this is the curve for solar. This is PPAs, power purchase agreements in the United States. It's gone to about 5 cents in 2015. And look at where it's headed. Still down, right? 5 cents. That's where it came in last year. And in fact, Saudi Arabia, which is investing about $100 billion in solar, announced last year a PPA for 4.9 cents, unsubsidized. 4.9 cents. A month ago, Dubai announced a PPA for 2.9 cents. 2.9 cents. Now, nothing can compete with this. And I'll give you an idea of what this means. Solar or anything at 5.8 and Dubai is at 2.9 is the equivalent of a barrel of oil at 10 or gas at about 5. And solar is already at half that. Good luck competing, even on a utility scale. So what's going to happen is essentially that solar, distributed solar, is going to eat everything because the costs are coming down and it doesn't have any cost of transmission. And whatever is left, essentially solar is going to eat because even on a utility scale, solar is already coming in below the cost of every single form of generation. And in Nordic countries that don't get enough sunshine, essentially the rest is going to be generated by wind. So let me wrap it up. Let me take you back to the future, which is what I started with, right? It's 2016, and we're there, right? Remember, where is the car? Everything that I've talked about is at about 1% market penetration or even less, which is why a lot of folks say, you know, it's going to be decades. It's going to be forever before EVs disrupt ICE cars or before solar disrupts energy. But as you see, we're on the cusp of a major disruption. We're like almost there. And it's going, basically this industry, which is an industrial era industry, both energy and transportation, is making a transition to becoming a high technology industry. So it's going to be all about computing. It's going to be all about digital. So the 4 key technologies, energy storage, electric vehicles, self-driving, and solar, are all improving exponentially. And even conventional energy and transportation CEOs are saying now that over the next 5 to 10 years, we'll see bigger changes, bigger transformations than we've seen in 100 years since the invention of the ice car itself and of the central generation utility. And this disruption really is not in the future. This disruption is happening as we speak right now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Seba.
My
and
pleasure.
as a token of appreciation,
Thank you.
may we request Your Honor to accept a memento from His Excellency Private Councillor, Air Chief Marshal Kamthon Sinthawanon, the Chairman of PTIT Foundation.
Thank you.